Good afternoon and welcome to the Greater North Dakota Chamber's 2020 Policy Summit. I'm Eric Spencer, GNDC's President and CEO. This is the fourth panel of our virtual Policy Summit series and focuses on the road ahead for North Dakota energy. If you're joining us for the first time, please know we never intended to do this conversation as a virtual event, but in doing so, decided to make our conversations more casual to quickly get to the heart of big issues facing our state. We thank you, our attendees, for supporting this new style, and we also thank our event sponsors, because without their support, this event wouldn't take place. Special call out to a few of our bronze sponsors, which include Odney, KLJ, One Oak, Xcel Energy, Eide Bailly, TC Energy, Fisher Industries, Enbridge, and the Lignite Energy Council, as well as all of our other sponsors for their support. Before I pass things off to our moderator, a few housekeeping items. We are broadcasting live from the Dakota Carrier Network facility in Bismarck, North Dakota, and anticipate this panel will last about 1 hour. Bios of our moderator and panelists are listed below. Attendees can submit questions at any time, which will be sent to the panel moderator. To do this, please use the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. There, you'll also see a chat tab. You can use that to interact with other attendees. The chat moderator, who will be commenting on this panel, engaging with attendees, and providing another expert opinion is Zach Smith, Communications and Government Relations Director with the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. Thank you, Zach. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome our panel moderator, someone who cares deeply about the path forward for North Dakota energy and the path forward for our entire state, Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much to everyone who's tuning in online. This is a very important topic that we're going to be discussing today. Thank you to our distinguished panelists we have today. I'm not going to take too much time introducing, but as was mentioned by Eric, we did intend on doing this in person and having a live audience, and so now I guess your reactions we'll hear about them afterwards on the evaluations and maybe even text in comments. So thank you for tuning in. Hopefully it's a good, robust conversation for you. We have a very distinguished panel today. We have Jason Bohr on my left from the Lignite Energy Council. We have Nicole Kavisto from MDU. We have Justin Kringstad, North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We have Kathleen Nessett Consulting, formerly Chair of State Board of Higher Ed, now Chair of North Dakota Petroleum Council. So very distinguished panel. Thank you for taking part in this. We should be able to get to a very robust conversation just with who's here today. I basically asked how long we have, because with 1 hour, this group could go far over 1 hour if each one of us were given the amount of time we feel is necessary for our individual topics. But it's very certain that in North Dakota we have become prolific energy producers, not only in oil and gas, but in electricity generation. We produce far more than what we need. Also in ethanol and other ag matters that way. But with that prolific energy production, there are always challenges, not only with the environmental side, as we're facing in the lignite issues today, and also in agriculture, and always with oil and gas, but within transmission of that product out, whether it's pipelines, whether it's gathering capacities in the oil fields, whether it's transmission for the electricity. And some of those, there are significant challenges today, and a lot of those challenges were rearing their heads before COVID, let alone with what's happened with COVID. Now with COVID-19, we've had demand destruction in oil and gas, and we've had lower demands in electricity, and so that's put large projects on hold. That to Justin's dismay on the flaring challenges we have as a state. I mean, some of these projects were years in coming to get the appropriate amount of gas capture happening, and with the reduction in oil volumes and production, we're seeing these projects stop. With the transmission side, we're seeing a continued unbalanced effort from federal government, from local regulatory, et cetera, on how the different generation capabilities are brought online and what they're facing from environmental regulations, from cost standpoint, from subsidy, and so we'll get into that today as well. We will be looking to a very robust legislative session, so that's where a lot of the chamber members do get involved and pay attention as well. And you can imagine that local control, you can imagine that environmental concerns and regulatory concerns and subsidy concerns, and what can the state do for these different energy concerns that we have, what solutions can we put forward in legislation. And so those conversations are happening today. And I had a panel yesterday that was East meets West. And the topic was what's going to happen to oil tax revenues, because not only do our water revenues for water projects and a lot of our education funding revenues, but a lot of our general fund monies come from oil tax revenue. And sales tax, as a matter of fact, is derived a lot from oil and gas tax revenue. So becomes a statewide conversation of what's happening to our economy, and it comes back to energy. So I am been blessed with being able to run this panel today. I sit on the Empower Commission as ex officio member. Being from Watford City as mayor, it was very apparent the interplay between industry, local control, citizenry, landowners, and how it all has to work together. So with that, I think I'd like to jump into our transmission challenges that we have today first, and that does end up touching the oil and gas side of the table as well, because there are gas generation projects going on now with peaking plants and other talks of new projects, which Kathy or Justin may or may want to get into, of what it might look like if there is actual energy production, electricity production from natural gas in the future. But first of all, let's dive into, with Nicole and with Jason, what you see as challenges in your industries as far as transmission today and in the future. Jason?
Sure. Thanks for the question, and thanks to hosting this panel, to GNDC. And really on the transmission side, you're seeing some of the same constraints that we've dealt with in the past raise their head now. Because we export so much of our product, we're influenced by what happens outside the borders. And on the electricity side, beyond that, there's also, I would say, artificial, at least semi-artificial constructs that are additional obstacles, where we've got our regional transmission associations like MISO or SPP, and the engineering technological difficulties of moving electrons that used to be heading one direction and switching them to go another direction, or crossing borders into new markets. So sometimes the electrons are there and the demand is there, but the processes at the policy level don't exist or don't facilitate moving the electrons from where they're being generated to where they need to go and where they could be used. And we see this trying to get the electrons to the west, which is why this is an interrelated problem. It's not just the lignite electricity side. We've got industries that could soak up those electrons, but it's hard to move those to where they belong, where they need to be, and where they could actually be met at their highest value, which is what you want when you're selling a commodity. Move it to where it's valued at the highest level. So that's a challenge, and it's one that's not going away in the near term, because it's also an expensive infrastructure challenge.
Right. So if you could share with the audience a little known, I would say, when you get outside of the utility industry side of the fact that the Coal Creek plant that's in the news today, those electrons can't be sold a few miles to the west on the other side of the river. If you could explain that we're in two separate grids and it actually goes in the middle of the state. If you could just explain that quickly,
Yeah,
in layman's terms, Jason.
I'll give it a shot.
Good luck.
But the grids developed from a local level to a regional level, and then 10, 15 years ago, there was a national oversight that was implemented for redundancy and some other issues. But where those lines were drawn, it goes through the state, and it makes it very difficult to move those electrons across that line. There's some engineering realities behind that. There's some policy realities behind that. And it's not that it can't be done, but it is an expensive proposition. And when you're dealing with a product that has very low margins like electrons do, and they've been flowing one direction for the entire life of that project on a DC line, where does that investment come from to cause those electrons to do a U-turn and cross a physical and regulatory and policy barrier to get them into another grid? It's a multi-tiered problem that can't just be solved like that.
In not a few weeks, right?
Right, and which is when you'd like it to see it done.
But it might be years?
Years, it's certainly not months.
Yep.
And where there's a will, there is a way, but it also has to make economic sense for everybody involved. And that's where, again, you're dealing with a product that's already economically challenged and very low margins, to say, raise your hand if you want to make this investment. That's where I think we've had good conversations in Empower to say, are there policy obstacles that we could identify at a state level that would facilitate this? Or are there policies at the federal level that could facilitate this? Because the truth is, everybody wins in that scenario.
Yeah.
But where does the impetus, the investment, those incentives come from to make it happen? And that's where I think everybody is looking at a lot of different options to make that a reality.
Right, thank you. Nicole, what concerns do you see as a regulated utility and with your capacity concerns and with your transmission and generation concerns in your markets?
Yeah, I would say with respect to transmission, one of the things that we see specifically that affects our company is just the uncertainty around what kind of costs you're going to incur. So as we look at next generation resource, so as we look at our load forecast as an example and we see increasing load, we have a need for generation. Well, then we'll put out a request for proposal to see what kind of generation should we add to our fleet. As people are putting those bids back and giving those bids back to us as an example, there is really this unknown in terms of how much is it going to cost that generation to interconnect to the grid. And because of that unknown, we're grappling with, does this make sense or not? And as they go to MISO and these interconnects are requested from MISO, it becomes a timing issue. So how long is it going to take to get that turned around so that we can have certainty around those costs? And it becomes an unknown in terms of the cost. And so that's one of the biggest challenges we see with respect to transmission is as we look to new generation, what's going to be the cost of interconnecting that generation? And as we know, there's transmission challenges, as Jason very adequately pointed out. I think the other thing that adds to complexity is building new transmission, as we all know. In this room is not a, you can do that tomorrow type of proposition. So as we know that there's a shortage, we know that this is long-term planning that needs to take place as you really look to the future. And so it's going to take, a lot of minds together working through these challenges. But certainly that's one of what I would say is the top thing we see as a concern with respect to transmission is just uncertainty around cost to connect and the timing for that build out.
And the cost to connect is becoming a bigger issue, a higher cost.
Correct.
More uncertainty. So it adds some uncertainty to the lower renewables costs.
Correct. Yep.
So it kind of leads me to a question that's been on the screen here since the beginning. So, and I'll put the preface in that you, as in all utilities in the state, have all the above resources. You have wind, you have coal. Our utilities, for the most part, don't have nuclear, but Xcel Energy does. But you do not. But question here is why are North Dakota utilities moving away from coal? Is it because they're mandated to buy wind or other reasons? Is the question.
Yeah, great question. So in the state of North Dakota, there are no renewable portfolio standards. So I guess that's one of the first questions. In the states that we provide electricity, we do have one state, that is Montana, that does have a renewable portfolio standard, which is 15%. We far exceed that. So the standard we have in Montana is not affecting our decisions in North Dakota, as an example. Really, when we look to our decisions from a fleet perspective, we are going to always be focused on least cost resource for our customer. I believe our job is to provide safe and reliable service at the lowest cost. So as we look to our recent retirement announcements as an example, and that may be where the question is coming from, it really came down to economics. We were dealing with an aging unit, 60 or some years old, and they were just not economic. We were seeing rising costs coming out of those units to operate them, and we were comparing that to a declining market price. And really, when you look at what was driving that decline in the market price of energy, it was lower gas costs, it was increasing renewable penetration, it was a combination of things. But ultimately, when we did that comparison, it said that here we were with an economic decision in the best interest of our customers. We felt we needed to make that decision. So not driven by an environmental policy at the state level, it was really driven by economics, in summary.
We have another question. This will be back to Jason, and it ties in perfectly. It's getting to the question of why coal is not is not being moved into. Well, we know there's going to be significant cost to continue with our 40-year-old fleet of coal plants. And so the question here is, what's the update on Project Tundra? So for those that are tuning in, Project Tundra is the carbon-free move towards the future, where you're actually capturing the CO2 coming out of the flue gas, out of the stack, and sequestering it, or actually utilizing it for enhanced oil recovery or some other means or some other commercial production. But Jason, if you could give a quick update on Project Tundra for those that are dying to know that answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's great timing because we just had another meeting of the Lignite Research Council, which has been a partner along with Minn Kota, Department of Energy, in funding Project Tundra. Project Tundra continues to move forward. I think it's a great project. I'm very hopeful about it. It hasn't run into any roadblocks that would set it back. We just approved another $5 million from the Lignite Research Council, paired with, I think it was $50 million from the federal level. So we're talking now about large-scale engineering investments. You're starting to put things in the ground. The test wells has been drilled, and everything we've seen so far points to that project coming online successfully. It's not to say that there's not going to be some additional things that can be changed or some additional things that might come up, but it is a successful project. From my position in the Lignite Research Council, I can say 100% that has been a success from day one, because it has answered the questions that it's needed to answer. It has pushed the science forward, but it's also pushed the reality of carbon capture from coal forward, and we're closer to that day, doing it economically from the position of the plant than we ever have been before. It's going to be the largest project in the world when it's done, of its nature. Yeah. So 100% success, kudos to Minn Kota for making it happen. But also, this is something that's taken a lot of foresight and planning from the state government officials. People don't necessarily recognize this, but the state has had to really make changes and has been a great partner in facilitating this, making changes to the way the research dollars flow.
Right.
Everybody has pulled in the same direction on this project, and I think we're going to show the successful nature of that approach in just a few short years.
There's even oil taxes going into that research bucket, isn't there not?
It really, it's
just had to put that plug in.
Yep, right. It just shows that everybody understands why this is important.
Yes.
And we hope that when it is successful, that there's a return for everybody, for the entire state. It's going to be good for the lignite industry, sure, but it's also going to be good for the petroleum industry. This is a benchmark project that's going to be looked back on 30 years from now as when the next phase in energy development, the next energy economy in North Dakota, which is the CO2 energy economy, began operation. So it's a big deal.
So do you believe we can get to a carbon neutral production of lignite coal in this state with Project Tundra?
It will lead the way. And if what we want is carbon neutrality, this is the way to get there. If what we want is net carbon negative, we can get there, because this is going to create a market for carbon dioxide. Not in the first 5 years, where there's still some engineering and economic issues to work out. But when you're dealing with the world's largest supply of lignite, you got to have a longer time frame than 5 years. You're looking, and I always say, look at what the first round of serious investment in lignite got us from the 70s to the mid 80s. Generational prosperity.
Right.
Now, what are we going to do to leave that legacy for the incoming generation? Another multi-decade series of prosperity and significant capital investments, and this is the start of that.
Right. So those assets are 40 years old, so yes, it's probably time for that next generation. Yep. All right. So I think we can pivot over to Justin, because natural gas enters this equation as well. And with all that Jason was describing, doesn't sound like it's going to be free. And with what Nicole was describing is there's market price considerations on what the utilities are sourcing for their power. They've got capacity concerns, but also pricing. What does carbon neutral coal power look like to you? I'm assuming it's going to still get back to pricing, et cetera.
Right. So as an industry, obviously, and working with Lignite Energy Council and the Research Council on some of these projects, I mean, we support technology advancement. And so, projects such as this, I think where you step back as though somebody that has to make these decisions in the interest of our customers, our challenge will be, can we get that technology to be price competitive as we look at a full package relative to something else, an alternative? And again, today, we are tasked with making sure we have adequate capacity. So don't get me wrong, reliability is a huge consideration. And as we see a shift to renewables, certainly that becomes a concern for not only our regulators, but our customers and, of course, me alike. So we need to make sure we're balancing reliability, 24/7 resources, and renewables generally aren't providing that. But we also got to balance costs. So if you're dealing with something that may not be economic to start, we have to just make sure we're considering what are we willing to pay for that reliability then, and does that make sense for our customers? Because again, we are still about least cost for our customers, but reliability is a component. It becomes a balancing act. It's not always as straightforward as I think people like it to be, but certainly we want to make sure that we're continuing to look at all options. And you mentioned in your opening remarks, that's really what we have today in our portfolio, right? Is on all of the above. And I know some people don't like that word, but really that is what we have, and we're continuing to look at options moving forward, but economics will be a factor, just like it has been in the past for us, and price competitive generation is certainly going to be top of mind, but so is reliability.
Right.
So we want to make sure we've got capacity that will run when we need it.
Thank you for interjecting that. Capacity and reliability, and if there should be more compensation for capacity that's
Reliable.
dispatchable and reliable, that's an ongoing topic at Empower, and not only here, but within the grids, within the MISO grid on the east side of the state, within the SPP grid on the west. They're doing studies of how much penetration of renewables can we handle and still have capacity that is there and reliable and dispatchable.
Yep.
Switching to Justin for a minute, so one thing that's notable that has come up at Empower a number of times is the fact that natural gas nationwide is really what has been crowding out some of the coal, the merchant coal plants, et cetera, but it's not in this state. What is your feeling, Justin? What are your thoughts on why we are low as far as penetration of natural gas-fired electricity in North Dakota, with having so much extra natural gas that we are concerned about flaring and spend so much time on Industrial Commission talking about flaring challenges and goals?
Yeah, correct. So the natural gas in North Dakota is a little bit unique from some of the major plays around the U.S. and North America, and that our natural gas comes up with the crude oil. And so the economics and the oil industry activity is focused on the crude oil. The natural gas comes up with it. So with that, it's not the primary focus of producers. And so the first goal is to make sure that they're capturing that and getting it moved to a market. The North Dakota market, when you heard Jason speak a moment ago, we're a net exporter of electricity. And so we have this vast amount of generation already from our lignite, our renewables. So as we transition, we are seeing more projects come up for natural gas. MDU has the one project in Mandan, and then others that are being contemplated. So I think it will become an increasing component of our generation stream going forward. But nationwide, we're seeing that same transition as coal fleets are either being retired or just new generation being added, because the pricing for natural gas North America wide is quite low relative to what it's been in the past. So it makes for a very quick and easy switch for some companies to do.
Looks like the question's coming in. We're going to stay on this transmission topic for a while. So let's jump into storage options. Battery storage, where are we at on that? The question is it being explored? And I would tell the listeners from the EERC up in UND, the Environmental Research Center at University of North Dakota, perspective is they're into hydrogen, they're into all these other types, but storage, there's some work, but not a lot. And that's something that we do need to be mindful of here, is if there's going to be renewables on the grid, no matter if our coal or natural gas portfolio stays the same or goes up, if there's renewables on the grid, storage is something that is of concern. Any comments from Jason or Nicole on where storage is at today and where that plays in your thoughts or where, from the Lignite Energy Council?
Yeah, we're interested in energy storage for a couple different reasons. First of all, it could help smooth the demand coming off the power plant, so they don't have to ramp down at night. That would be a big cost saver to us. So I think we're interested in it for some of the same reasons that everybody's interested in it. But we're also interested in it from a supply side, which is where you're going to get the raw material to make all these batteries from.
Yeah.
And we think we have a role to play from a mining side in providing some of the rare earth elements that are necessary for large-scale and small-scale battery storage. So we're interested in it from a couple different directions. We've got research projects from a Lignite Research Council, significant interest in the rare earth and supply side, and then some of our members independently are looking at some other projects on the battery storage side where it would be probably later in the supply chain.
So share with the viewers, are there rare earths in the coal veins or around the coal deposits? Is that where you would find them?
Yeah, they're going to be associated with the coal deposits, and one of our challenges now is kind of pre-flagging those deposits where you might find the richest concentration of rare earth, because they're not terribly economical to mine on their own in North Dakota due to the decreased concentrations. But if you're already mining the coal, or you could co-produce rare earth elements and coal from the same process, all of a sudden the economics of the rare earths really go through the roof. But also you're decreasing the variable costs of the coal itself because you're co-producing something else. You're adding a new revenue stream to that. So I think there's significant interest there. And the United States has to find domestic sources of rare earth elements. It has to. It's a congressional and presidential priority for both parties.
Yep.
It will happen. We're trying to make sure that part of it happens here. And I think we're going to see some successes in the future on that too.
Be a great byproduct for our lignite industry.
Absolutely.
Helping provide rare earths for the country. Nicole, any considerations from at your level? Are you getting into storage projects? I know in California they talk about it a lot, and they're trying to get into what might work. Is that considerations that you have?
Yeah, so over the last couple, as I talked earlier about our request for proposals, when we put those out, in the last several, we have actually seen bids on solar with battery backup, and so we, I would say, have increased our knowledge on these products over the last several years, and certainly they are becoming, the technology has improved, the costs have improved. Today, one of the things that you see as a challenge when you hear people talk about it as a direct backup to renewable is today's technology is, that the hour span that you get out of that is, for some people it's a struggle. It doesn't provide the backup that's needed. Maybe that's a 4-hour window, let's just say, and then it needs a recharge. Well, is that enough to get you through a peak? And so today, if you're looking at it from strictly just only a backup to renewable, there are still some challenges out there. Now, if you're looking at it as part of your overall portfolio, which is how we would be considering it at the utility, there is optionality there, and it is becoming more real. And I think as we look to our future resources, you'll continue to see that bid in as a potential. So, I mean, we will continue to keep that on the radar. But today, to answer the question, we don't have any today in our system.
Right. So I think we'll have time at the end to talk more about our E&P concerns on the oil and gas, but let's stay on the natural gas value add side from Justin and Kathy's perspective. What other opportunities are there as far as what you see with gas, with ethane, et cetera, that are besides electric generation? I mean, that's a big opportunity, and when it's spoken of is usually for that handling the growth in the Bakken, is if that growth could be assisted with keeping some of the natural gas there and firing some of that excess gas and turning it into electrons. But what other opportunities do you see moving forward for the Bakken play as far as staying competitive?
Yeah, so the Bakken play, to their last point of how does the Bakken stay competitive? And one of the key things and one of the key challenges that North Dakota's always had is our distance to market and distance to major markets. So we can celebrate being the geographical center of North America, but from a marketing perspective, that's not ideal. So to stay competitive, we have to have robust and reliable options for moving and marketing our products. One of the big challenges for some time, obviously, a component of the natural gas is our natural gas liquids. And if anyone following the petroleum industry in North Dakota, you've heard a lot about Northern Border over the last half a year. And what's taking place there is a proposal by Northern Border to restrict the amount of ethane that can be injected into that pipeline system. And that's being worked through at the federal level right now. But should that go through, North Dakota will have a significant challenge ahead of it for its industry in order to manage that ethane resource. And a challenge as well as an opportunity for folks that may see a way to take that ethane and use it for either power generation as probably one of the quickest and easiest ways to do something with that. The petrochemical industry is a longer term view that folks are looking at. So it's things like that, along with our midstream ability to market and move product, but anything we can do to add value in North Dakota is going to help North Dakota's competitiveness with these other plays around North America and around the globe.
So you mentioned the Northern Border, and I've had phone calls from Nicole's sister company about concerns about that 1100 BTU spec, and that's a real concern when these gas plants are not constructed to be spitting out gas at 1100 BTU. They're higher spec, and they were hoping to get down to 1100. But so from that immediate challenge of those plants that don't have the cryogenic technology to get the ethane stripped off, what it does create an even greater opportunity for those looking to add value to the ethane, does it not?
Correct. And so we have facilities in North Dakota that can meet this proposed spec and facilities that cannot. That would either need to make substantial investments, they would need to find other alternative solutions to handle that ethane. And so those are the things right now that are on the table for folks to really grind away right now to try and find solutions very quickly, because this is something that is very immediate on the timeline should the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approve it here. The decision is likely by early November. So the wheels are all moving very quickly to find a solution.
So if we don't find an ethane solution, then what? Then the options are, it's going to be another constraint on production in the Bakken, I would assume.
It'll be a constraint. So if you have a facility that could not meet it and they had to be shut in because they were not meeting the transmission specs on the gas grid, anything behind that gas plant would have to go to flare. And so and with flaring restrictions, then you have restrictions in oil production. So I mean, these are very real issues for the state to deal with. So again, there's a whole lot of smart minds right now trying to come up with solutions, but there is no easy thing to point your finger at and say, here's an easy solution that everyone can implement, because it's extremely complex. No two facilities are identical. They all have their own unique set of circumstances, and they'll each need their own unique solution.
And there's not a separate ethane gathering system today.
Correct. Today there is not. Really the only option for that ethane was to go into Northern Border, or it was to go down in the Y-grade mix down to Kansas and then ultimately down to the Gulf Coast. And where the ethane markets are, unfortunately, that ethane is taking a loss because it costs more to process it and transport it than the market was willing to pay downstream. So the best value for North Dakota today is to put it in Northern Border. They can at least get a heat value for that ethane, but if they have to stick it in the Y-grade stream and take a loss, that all trickles back to the royalty owners, to the producers. So it's a tough situation right now.
In Texas, where they have petrochemical facilities on the coast and you've got the production within the state, are there separate ethane gathering systems, or do they transport them in the Y-grade and then separate out once you get to the eventual petrochemical facilities?
You'll see a mix of both, where they'll have large processing facilities where they'll separate out the various streams and then send it in purity form, or similar to what we have with Y-grade. There are also Y-grade systems sending it to more centralized processing, but ultimately it needs to go into that purity product stream of ethane before it can be sent to the petchem facilities.
All right, thank you, Justin. With that, Kathleen, you could cover a lot of topics in here, but what would I know you're involved from petrochemical side and from the project generation side of value adding on ethane. What else is needed to get an ethane delivery system in place at our state so that we would become something that the petrochemical industry was looking towards as a brownfield that's already ready to go versus coming in with a completely greenfield build?
Lieutenant Governor, that's exactly where we need to be. We need to be, creating this value added right here in North Dakota, as Justin has, kind of alluded to and talked to other times. As this Bakken oil field ages, the amount of ethane will continue to increase. It is the gas-oil ratio will go up. We will continue to have more ethane. So this is really an issue of, it's a byproduct of the oil.
Yeah.
We know that the oil is the primary product and the gas, natural gas, and then the byproduct of that is the ethane. But the ethane has value, and we need to build out that gathering system. And I would say we need to start immediately with legislation right here with our legislature meeting, here in this coming year, and look to build the, the business-friendly structure that you and Governor Burgum have done in the past to be able to use this ethane right here. And the first thing will be to power generation. That will be a precursor to petchem, but petchem is a long ways down the road. I look more to, we have baseload power needs in this country.
Yeah.
Let's look at, what's going on out in California right now. There are difficulties. We don't quite have the technology with the battery storage for renewables. So for, states that have built so much of their power generation in the renewable direction, we still need, I've heard the term used as a partner fuel.
Yeah.
And ethane can be that. It doesn't mean we neglect our work towards renewables. We do them hand in hand. And I think right here in North Dakota, with our we have to start treating ethane as a valuable commodity, not a waste product.
Right. So that's why we talk about growing a bigger pie in the state and working together and collaborating, because not only with Project Tundra will there be preserving that lignite energy that we have, but it's very windy here, so it's a positive thing as far as wind development. It's viewed as a strong wind asset state. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing for the lignite side. It doesn't have to be a bad thing for utilizing that ethane if we've got the transmission to get all these electrons out. And so that's why John Weida could have been a panelist here and probably talked for all of us, the North Dakota Transmission Authority, but when you hear of his concerns, that it takes a little bit of what all of you have talked about, that yes, that disparate generation that's all over the place from wind towers versus knowing where those coal plants were, that creates quite a transmission challenge, besides the fact that it's not all day long like those baseload power plants are. And then when natural gas to this point is peaking plants, that's not a permanent production either. So Kathleen, if you could talk to what projects might be coming down the pike as far as getting from the peaking, like natural gas, taking natural gas off the grid and running peaking plants when you get low. What's this next phase that we're talking about?
The next step in the next build out is to be able to provide opportunities for these oil producers to be able to get value added to that ethane product that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that means what we need is the natural gas, the ethane fired power generation. And then we transmit that. When we talk about the transmission of electrons, the ones, when we have a product, and I say, it's a byproduct of a byproduct, the ethane, we need to make value added to that right here in North Dakota. Build out the gathering system. It's already in the works that companies are working on this very closely. We already know of Bakken Midstream working along with Basin Electric. We know of different partners coming together and doing these things. A gathering system, the ethane gathering system is needed to build this out. This is a way to create value to the oil, and that keeps the oil producing. It eliminates, or at least nearly brings to zero the flaring challenge that we're having right now. It brings value added to the state by not only encouraging the oil, but also we have a need for power right here in North Dakota, as well as to export it. We are an energy exporting state, and that really brings value to all North Dakotans.
Right, and Justin, what, I'm just reading a question. Okay, I'll read the question instead. There's a question of Basin Electric is adding 225 megawatts of natural gas out west, and MDU adding natural gas at MDU. Will this trend continue on smaller type of projects? That question from a listener here today.
So do you want me to take
Nicole,
that?
go ahead.
And I guess I can't necessarily speak for Basin, but
Yeah.
on behalf of MDU, what we're doing, just for maybe the benefit of the audience, for those that don't know, is we are building an 88 megawatt simple cycle next to a sister that we already have in Mandan here, same 88 megawatts as well. And so I don't know if the person is getting to, will you continue to build these small peakers, or will we see partners come together and do larger scale power generation? Certainly we continue to explore all our options. So as you look at MDU's fleet today, we do have generation that we are partnering on. So our Coyote facility, as an example, Otter Tail is the operator. We're a part owner in that facility, 25%. We have a Big Stone facility in South Dakota, not in North Dakota, but we're a part owner in that facility. So we have, in the past, come together from a multi-utility perspective and partnered on other units. So will we continue to consider that? The answer to that is yes. But we will also, again, just like I commented before, we will look at that as compared to other options, right? And we will continue to make decisions that are in the best interest of the customer. So, I think the point is we have to keep our options open, and certainly partnering with others would be one of those things we would certainly be open to. Yep.
Right. So the ethane then turns into a combined cycle plant that's more like a 600 megawatt or 750 megawatt plant. So it's not like the smaller peaking plants, correct?
Correct.
And so it's not like a furnace in your house. All of a sudden it's more like it's a power plant.
Power
And
plant.
so it's more reliable and it's larger investment, longer term, but also lower variable cost.
Lower cost, lower input cost because of the feedstock. The ethane is so low cost. It then results in low cost energy production. But I kind of like, to where we've gone with the other panelists here, is this is not about any one,
Right.
technology here in North Dakota. I look at North Dakota as so blessed in so many different, energy, resources, and for us to complement one another is really what this is about. And I go to the idea that coal and electricity and oil and gas and wind and solar and everything together, we're stronger together. So as we continue to work in these ways and share different capacities and build outs and transmissions and those types of things, North Dakota, the citizens are the ones who win.
Right. So the next step out from ethane generation is petchem. But with petchem, there would need to be storage, correct?
Correct. Storage is a big issue. Now, there's two reasons why you need storage when you talk to petchem. And you can actually talk about storage for ethane to power generation, but it's not quite as critical. When you get into the petchem industry, you need to store the feedstock, because the cost of keeping these facilities running is so great that you want to have a very reliable, long supply of the ethane to do this. How do you do that? You go to underground storage. That is the most cost-effective, safest. And where is that? Is in our salt caverns.
Yeah.
So we've already been working with your office as far as and the work with different companies as far as studying where these salt caverns are. And once again, here I'll go. North Dakota is blessed with some pretty neat geology that has the salt caverns in the Dunham, the Pine, and the Opeechee salts at shallow enough depths that we can do that. And we can build these salt caverns, we can do the storage. But all of this takes all of these industries working together, I think, to be able to look to something brownfield for petchem, if that is, an ultimate goal here. In the meantime, we have a wonderful opportunity to bring ethane, to electrical generation and baseload power.
It seems like it's a unifying topic in the storage underground. Our geology in coal country and in oil country is such that it behooves that. Whereas you go into Minnesota with just granite, bedrock, there's not the ability to do it. You have to get to Jamestown and get into the Wilson Basin Depression to have that geology. And so it's just another thing the Bakken affords, not only rare earths, but it's also a place to store for storage of the renewables that are, if you're overproducing and trying to store that heat underground. So it's something that might end up coming back to legislative session, I assume, because we took a few steps towards it last session and got kind of bogged down in a pore space argument that this wasn't really ready to gel. The pore space was a reaction to a lawsuit that ended up being about saltwater disposal. Wells in western North Dakota, whether the surface or the mineral estate had the right to those, and it's obviously the surface estate has the right to those. So this is going to be an issue for any of these topics when you get to landowner surface rights and pore space, et cetera.
Lieutenant Governor, when you get into that a lot, I really feel, because I think your office has done so much of that, it's really about educating. And this is, the underground storage, does not deal with the pore space issue. It is totally different, but it's a matter of educating, as you say, and making sure that, our general North Dakotans, who are really pretty energy savvy people in this country, understand and are involved in this discussion.
Right. And we have 14 minutes left. I'm going to put a plug in for some of our biomass, and we have excellence in ethanol. We have excellence in biomass. Now we're looking at greenhouse projects utilizing CO2. We are still looking for announcements on a soybean crush facility that actually the soybean crude oil would then be shipped to Dickinson, to a plant that is being retrofitted to create renewable diesel for the California market. And the California market is not only looking for renewable diesel, but they're also looking for ethanol with a little bit more than a commodity ethanol grade than what you can get out of Iowa cornfields. But we can do that here as well. A couple of projects have come through and I could kick this to Jason if you want, and you could take on something besides lignite, but some of the councils that you serve on have approved some grants for the ethanol plants to also look at sequestering carbon.
Yeah, carbon dioxide is, it's an interesting policy thing to delve into because there's a lot of different rationales for looking at it. We try and come at it from, is this an economic opportunity for us? On the ethanol side, we did see an opportunity to jumpstart a CO2 economy.
Yeah.
And we're very interested in that. And again, circling back to the changes that the legislature has made with an eye toward the next 40 years of prosperity, jumpstarting a CO2 economy, there was an opportunity through the Lignite Research Council to partially fund a project that was focused on ethanol instead of lignite. But there was a value in that because it would create a viable CO2 economic project.
Right.
That it was the beginning of, you might point back to that in the lignite industry 30 years from now and say that project was the first one that convinced investors that they can invest in CO2 projects in North Dakota and make money.
Right.
And then you can start, how do you apply that to lignite? So we thought that was a reasonable investment to make sure that we're making progress on the CO2 economy in North Dakota.
Right, thank you. And it does give these ethanol plants a leg up in the industry, and they've got demand for ethanol on the West Coast, and not only the United States but Canada for their ethanol when you're actually taking these steps, whether you're using waste steam from a coal plant like Blue Flint is by the Coal Creek plant, or whether they're now looking at CCUS at the Red Trail plant, and they've got a lower carbon score on that ethanol, then all of a sudden it's got a premium value in the market. So these are things that we don't have to be scared of ESG in this state if we just take our God-given assets and actually put them to work and think about what does the customer want, what does the market want, and I think we can get there with all of these assets that we're talking about around the table. We have 10 minutes left. I would like to get into oil and gas challenges at this time. Like I said, the panel I was leading yesterday was East Meets West. It was Grand Forks Chamber led, and it was talking to Williston, Watford folks and legislators from both sides. And we had Lynn Helms present on the oil ups and downs, and now we're at a down. And we had Ryan Rauschenberger present on the tax revenue outlook and the ups and downs. And it could have been the same presentation. Those charts go like this. And so we'll be getting into, for all those worried or wondering, we're in very good shape for the budget for this current biennium because we had all the cream cans full again, and we had enough money tucked aside, and the general fund is not as reliant on oil revenues, but the balancing effects are the SIF fund and and the legacy fund earnings, et cetera, are very oil-based. But what's happening is those funds like the Resources Trust Fund, that's reliant completely on oil and gas, that projection has gone from 400 million to 250. And so there's 150 million of water projects statewide that have to be held off on. And I've been chairing those meetings in the interim. It's not very fun. But I can tell you it's going to be even less fun if our production estimates look like what could happen if we were on a 10 drilling rig future because of the DAPL pipeline concerns and the takeaway capacity concerns. So Justin, if you could go into basically take the chart that you sent me yesterday that had the different curves based on 10 drilling rigs, 20, 30, 40, 50, and where we need to be to keep the 1.2 million to 1.3 million barrels that we've been at, which keeps our revenues where they are, or what happens if we don't keep up with the drilling so that production line goes down, bringing all of our revenues down.
Yeah. So folks that are following North Dakota's oil and gas production, they know that we saw in April, May, just substantial decreases in North Dakota's oil production levels and decreasing month over month that we had never even thought possible really before. And the good news is that from that deep trench in May, June, we're, I believe, now up to somewhere around that 1.2, 1.3 million barrels per day. A lot of the production that was shut in is back online now. So we're, as we sit here in August, in a much better position. The challenge now will be just naturally, the amount of wells and the type of wells we drill in North Dakota, they have a very steep decline curve. And if we are not adding enough new wells every single month, that decline curve will pull North Dakota's production down. And so in order to keep production even flat, if we were to just use 1.25 million barrels per day, we would need somewhere around 70 or 80 well completions per month to keep North Dakota's production flat. Today, we do not have enough drilling rigs and completion crews to meet that level. And so we will see this unique scenario where production will ramp back up in July and August because shut-ins. But we're at this tipping point now where we could start sliding downwards again if the industry does not increase the number of frac crews operating. The current rig fleet of 11, they can drill 20, 25 wells a month, and that's far lower than 70 to 80 that we need. The frac crews, the thing that does exist are drilled but uncompleted wells, so there's an inventory of those that they can work on. So, as we are here in August, maybe 50 to 60 wells will be completed, but again, still not the 70 or 80 that we need. So we, North Dakotans, and that's been kind of one of my messages to the budget folks the last number of weeks, is we got to be really careful as we see numbers increase July and August that we don't get some false optimism, because this could very easily start sliding again as activity just is not there yet and isn't anticipated to be here until maybe the first or second half of next year.
So even if the price stays where it was, I mean, we were at 1.3 million to 1.4 million barrels a day, and the price was like $50.
Yep.
That's not saying that we're going to jump back up to 1.3 million. You're saying if the drilling rigs and the fracking crews and the completions don't happen, even if the price is $50, our production could go down to 900 or 800,000.
Yeah, so price is historically a good indicator of what activity levels to expect, but right now there's a disconnect between those two. There needs to be some confidence from the industry that this price recovery will be here for a sustained amount of time, that with the threats of COVID and demand destruction maybe rearing its head again at an extreme level, what is OPEC going to do with the supply that they've curtailed? So the uncertainty right now, even though oil prices would tell us historically we should have more completions and more rigs than we do today, just the confidence and the capital just isn't there ready to commit. And in North Dakota we have winter coming, and so those things are...
How much is the DAPL relitigation of that issue? How much do you think that's putting into effect of deploying drilling rigs and fracking crews, or is it more of the COVID concerns and market concerns?
Fundamentally right now, I think COVID and the market concerns are dominant for North Dakota. We have that extra hurdle, that threat on the horizon. It's less of a near-term threat now. It's still a long-term threat if that system were to shut down. That would greatly harm our economics. And again, how does North Dakota compete with Oklahoma and Texas? If we have another $5 transportation hurdle, if you're a company looking to make investments, another $5 in today's price environment is major. So,
right.
That still has a lot of hair on it. So,
yeah, we have 5 minutes left. I'm going to give each of you 1 minute with this last question. In your expert opinion, is North Dakota business friendly for the energy sector? Kathleen?
Absolutely. I do. I think this is a very business-friendly state, legislative, government-wise. I think the populace is very business savvy. And I'd like to just follow up on one point of Justin was making. You know, part of this is, you know, yes, this is COVID related. Why our oil production is down, that is the direct hit to our demand. So that means, and our oil price is down. So how can we, that we have control over, help to bring that oil price up? And in my estimate is bring value to the byproduct, which is ethane. So if we add value to that, I think every dime makes a difference to these oil companies. And by adding value to the ethane and to the natural gas here in North Dakota, it makes it that much more. If it's just, you know, teetering on do we produce, do we put a rig up or not, if you make that ethane valuable, you have now helped that oil company make that decision to drill.
So if we're regulatory friendly and we have, and the pricing discounts aren't so steep, but all of a sudden we have something else making that natural gas byproduct more valuable, that can make an incremental difference in bringing more drilling capital here, right? Bringing more drilling rigs here that wouldn't have gone to the Permian.
Well, you talked about ESG.
Yeah.
And when we talk about ESG, there are companies that have to their shareholders, be able to say, we are environmentally friendly, we're sound, our governance policy shows that we are taking care of our ethane, we are not flaring gas in North Dakota. This is unacceptable. We have a solution to it. We have a market for that ethane. And I think that is a game changer in North Dakota's oil and gas industry.
Thank you. Justin, 1 minute, are we business friendly?
I may have a skewed view as a state agency.
You're going to say, yes, I am?
So I may, in fact, yield my time to the industry folks to see how they would respond.
How do
to
you,
that.
what kind of reaction do you get from gas companies and oil companies? Are they honest with you, do you feel? Are they telling you if there's things we should be
Absolutely.
looking at?
So,
Or?
I mean, the two agencies that I'm most familiar with from the regulatory, so the Pipeline Authority is not regulatory. The PSC, I would say, they have a tradition of being very friendly to the industry as far as safely and responsibly moving forward projects. The oil and gas division as well, I think, is looked upon favorably by the oil and gas industry. So nothing's ever perfect. So I think everyone realizes that there's room for improvements. But overall, compared to other states and other regulatory systems out there, I think, at least from those two perspectives, things are pretty well positioned.
All right, thank you. Nicole?
I will keep this short and simple, absolutely. We operate across an 8-state territory, and we have the privilege of working in a lot of states, and we've got a lot of them that are business friendly, and I would put North Dakota up there. I mean, we are able to work through, you know, to your point, I think we feel like we've got a good balance, right? You know, we've got the interests of our customers to heart, and you know, so do our regulators at the PSC, and working with government and trying to come to solutions. Absolutely, I think North Dakota is business friendly.
Thank you.
So I guess that wasn't as short as I originally said it was going to be. Yes, would have been my answer, short answer.
Very much within your time
Yeah,
allotted.
okay,
Thank you.
okay, thank you, good.
Jason?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's tough to answer. Since I've been here, I've seen huge cooperative, really beneficial initiatives with the state. Reworking our research council, the funding, has been a partnership that I didn't think would have been possible. Looking at where I've come from, knowing what I know about other states. Huge success. But I also see as North Dakota's economy has grown since 2008, government has got bigger. We're looking at, we're living in a different world, and I see things even now in some of the bureaucracy that I probably wouldn't have seen in 2013 when I got here, and that wouldn't have necessarily happened before that. Some actions are, I don't know, maybe more cautious than they might need to be, and I would say the answer to that is mixed. We've had great success with the government, the legislature on some things, while seeing some other issues that kind of make you question, why are we doing that right now?
Right. Well, and I can tell you from our standpoint with Water Commission, with DEQ, with DMR, I mean, we're constantly watching what the regulatory looks like, and we need the feedback. And I thank you all for being online. We've got 4 seconds left, so I thank you for the panelists, and thank you all for tuning in. Have a great day.
This session is now complete. Thank you to all that made this conversation possible, including panelists, moderators, and our sponsors.